especially if you're trying to move something forward, right? Like if you don't have those relationships or the ability to, get people again rallying around what you're trying to do, you're not going to be able to go as far as you'd like with it. Like it's just to me that's a very like binary, it's that or it's not type of thing.
Dan DiGangi discusses engineering mentorship and how engineering leaders can take an active role in promoting a culture of learning.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our engineering leadership series. I'm here with Dan DiGangi today. Did I say your last name right?
DiGangi, but I put it up for
DiGangi.
like 10 years. Mark, salespeople calling up, but it's fine. You're good.
For those of you who don't know Dan, he has been an engineering leader at DocuSign and Apartments.com, and we're so excited to have you here today.
I appreciate you having me on. It's nice to get my face out there, and I met you a long time ago, so I've been excited to do something together for a while.
Yeah, it's been so long, it seems. Was that 2018 or 2019?
Something like that, because I think it was right before my conference happened. So
Yeah.
my memory isn't as good as it used to be. A lot of gray hair, if you can't tell.
Well, so I know that you're like really passionate about like mentoring and teaching and things like that, and you've been doing a lot of that lately. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, of course, like as an engineering manager, it's like explicitly part of the role, in my opinion, it should be. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm teaching at a couple boot camps. I do private mentoring on the side, and I've also started doing like non-technical mentoring, like product and design. So I love living in that space. Super fulfilling. If you're into people and seeing them be successful, easily one of my favorite parts of the job. Easily.
Uh-huh. Nice. Awesome. What do you think is the difference between mentoring and teaching?
So it was okay. So when I came in, so one of the places I'm at is like 180 career shift type of like
Mm-hmm.
getting in development, and then the other one is like very motivated CS types, computer science students. And there's definitely like the Venn diagram and the overlap, but at the same time, I found that some of my like techniques didn't work as well with my students compared to when I saw it with engineers. So it kind of gave me some new perspective. I kind of looked at it like say like a junior, or I don't like the word junior, sorry, entry level or newer to the industry for both of them. But then what I found is that if you've been in dev a long time, right, like you built a lot of skills, you're very experienced, trying to pull back those layers to like really when you started and helping them, grow and get farther, it's really, really hard. I'm trying to think of a great example. So even like explanations, like, so again, of course, you don't have as much technical understanding when you're starting out as far as like depth and width and everything, but trying to figure out how to communicate that in a way between those different levels, or say a student versus an engineer, it took a lot of caressing and figuring out different ways to approach it. Like, even like having a good analogy or like an adjacent example, you really have to like kind of pick your words and try different things to see what resonates, right? Because you got everybody's different and dynamic, plus their skills and where they're at, and then also you trying to adapt and figure out your communication style, putting all those pieces together. It's definitely a difficult task, and it takes a long time to get good at mentoring, in my opinion. You can start at any point, and maybe I'll add this in there. My other thing with mentoring in general is I think everybody thinks a little too top down, like, I'm your manager, I go down to my developers, or I'm a senior, you're newer to the industry, but it goes in every direction. I think that gets lost a lot. Horizontal, up, down, everything.
Yeah. Do you think like entry level engineers should mentor senior engineers
I
or
think
can?
I I think it could be difficult from a technical perspective. It's not impossible, but it could be more difficult. I mean, right? Like you build a lot of experience over the years, and that's part of what helps you make and be that senior level. But also too is like, imagine like, if you're just like newer, just like not at senior level, you could provide feed if you're seeing like, hey, like this may not be as effective for others on the team, or we're not maybe seeing that growth we're looking for. That's a great opportunity. It could just be purely like communication or adapting communication styles, and like, hey, I noticed that this worked really well for me, but maybe John, it didn't work as well. Have you thought about this or tried this? Now, of course, you want to make sure people are open to receiving feedback, so I always say, there are discussions is like, hey, is it cool if we have a conversation? Is it okay if I share some feedback or input with you? And if they say no, which doesn't happen often, probably not the right time to have the conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, well, what about like, mentorship on different levels? Like, how do you mentor a senior level engineer?
Yeah, so I recently I was getting into thinking more in depth about this just because I'm living in this world, and I think I've noticed that a lot of, in general, anyone that comes to bring mentoring, a lot of people jump to newer to the industry engineers or less technical depth, and that does make sense. That is important, right? Because you're looking for those dividends to pay out later. But the challenge I find is how do you take someone that's either generally a rock star or they've already gotten to these higher levels and push them farther? It takes different kinds of challenges for sure, and you have to kind of figure out what those are and what you can actually provide because you may not always have exactly the opportunities. But if I had to like, if anyone is trying to understand like from a senior up, especially like staff and lead and just what do they call principal, distinguished, those really fancy ones, is their impact is not about their like the little world of coding, right? It's going across a system or across an organization or going in depth into it, or even again a few pieces of it that make up, a larger chunk. So like when you're working is how do you make that actual impact that brings not your team forward only, but more so is how do you bring the engineering organization forward? How do you bring the company forward? Right? Like I think that gets missed a lot, to be honest with you.
Yeah, yeah. So like it's really mentoring, gosh, like senior engineers, it's mentoring them on how to make a bigger impact, it sounds like. Like it's almost like, I mean, does that mean politics or does that mean like different focusing on different things?
So I'll jump back to the politics thing because that is a part of the equation to be able to make that impact.
Mhm.
But I would say like so I'm trying to think of this is kind of like a generic way to look at it, but I think it's a good analogy-ish type of thing, which is when you're newer, you just kind of live in your coding world, your ticket, you do your thing. And of course, as devs, we that's part of it, right? But are we actually evolving our engineering forward? So like we may things are very short term right now with the market and money, cost efficiency, and all those things, right? But is even if we're thinking that way, is are we setting ourselves up, bridging or stepping towards where we might want to be, or not might, but where we want to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years? That's tougher to do when you're newer, trying to have like that vision outward, right? Or even understanding that vision if it's coming from leadership around where engineering needs to go. Because, right, the higher levels, say director up, especially, is they're setting a vision to a degree of what we want engineering to be. But our job as a higher level engineer is to come in and say, just like product would do with a vision for the product, right? Is how do we turn that into a thing that we can take steps towards and actually go execute on? And it's tough. It's very tough. But that's one of the reasons as you go up that you bring those skills so you can see that width and that depth. So, maybe that example would be, you know, not just thinking of or starting to look, say, like again, kind of generic analogy, but moving to architecture or systems design, right? Is like, yeah, we need to make the application strong, but how does this fit in? How does this start to connect and integrate with other teams? That's where that impact can be made. And what's important, I would say, is if you are listening, you're on the engineering side, you're not in the leadership side, but it also can be helpful for both. Is one is you have to go and look and carve out those opportunities, right? You're given a problem to solve, but you don't get handed all the other things with it. The other side is going and asking for those opportunities because what you find is if I don't understand that vision or what other people are thinking about or what we're trying to bring in, that's going to limit and silo what I'm trying to do or I should be trying to do to make that impact to bring us forward.
And how has your perspective changed in terms of like mentoring, let's say mid-level engineers?
I don't know if it's changed around the mid level because you really are like playing between both sides where you're trying to breach into senior, right? Because we all, eventually hopefully want to get promoted and make a bunch of money. I think it's that I've started to I put more weight into what you brought up earlier, which is pushing senior engineers and higher. And one of the interesting things is, right, you truthfully, you can't scale yourself. You're one person and there's a limit, right? And I could spend all day, working and teaching and mentoring, a newer engineer. But I'm also trying to figure out as a team and as myself individually, what does scaling myself actually mean? I hate to use kind of a buzzword, but is if say take aside from the impact to the engineering org as far as like say projects and those types of things is, are others actually going and taking those mentoring steps and trying to bring people forward and grow them and move them up to higher levels? If it's just me, if you're doing that as you're on a team, that's a very small unscaled way to manage and grow a team. And if you're looking for those dividends to pay out later, you're going to find that it's going to take a very long time, or it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, so you're really like teaching the people how to teach. Teaching the
Exactly.
people to teach.
And what's one of the hardest parts, I'm sure you've run into this too, is not not every engineer is the greatest communicator or at working with people sometimes, right? So I always like get into like, about, a lot of places, how do they set it up is you're senior hire and you want to go higher. So what do? They drop you into management. But what you find is they're not harder or not, one's not harder than the other, but they're very different. And if you're staying in that engineering track, you do have to build those skills to be able to go do that. And if that's not your strongest area, okay, here, let me cap this one, which is you can be the best technical person, you can make huge impact on engineering, but if you don't have those other skills to go along with it, you're going to find very quickly that you're not going to go as far or be as effective as you think. And it actually kind of goes back to even your example earlier, the politics thing. So unfortunately, especially if you're in leadership, we know politics is part of it. It's unfortunate, it's rough, it can be painful. More gray hairs, I'm sure like 30% right here is from dealing with politics, of course, but it's part of the game, right? And if you say, so we talk about adapting communication or being a good communicator, but then another piece of it is do you know how to build relationships? Do you know how to get people together and move them towards a common goal or align to say a goal that the organization has and rally everyone around it? Like that is a miss that I think that I spend more time, to be honest, on the non-technical skills because I look to my higher level engineers to bring in the very direct in-depth technical, but I try to support by having everything else because now you're talking about an end-to-end picture of being not just a technical person, but a professional.
Yeah, but I think that's so what do you think about engineers that say, "Hey, no, I just want to code. Like I just want to be, you know, technical and within a project or something like that." Like is there a limit to their growth?
I think context matters in this situation. Like, I've noticed a lot of differences in how organizations take on like lead or especially staff. Like, so I go to some places, like my one of my last couple jobs, and the staffs were very like coding like hour by hour, and that was their world, and it was very focused around what the team was doing and their projects and everything. But other ones I've seen, and this is the one I prefer, is gravitating towards again that wider or deeper impact that's more about overall like the engineering work moving forward. But you might find that if we're like very targeted on say some project where we need to apply extreme technical expertise, that could make total sense. I do think that there is always going to be a limit if you don't have those skills, because especially if you're trying to move something forward, right? Like if you don't have those relationships or the ability to, get people again rallying around what you're trying to do, you're not going to be able to go as far as you'd like with it. Like it's just to me that's a very like binary, it's that or it's not type of thing. Now, of course, always context and nuance, but it's been a common thing that I've seen over and over again from when I was an engineer to now being in leadership.
Yeah, so it's funny because when you say that, I think about open source projects, and Ben made this comment like, if I wasn't likable, RxJS wouldn't have gone anywhere. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how true is that? That you know, technologies are built around, or technologies are successful because, like, everybody says the HTMX guy is funny,
Are
right?
you the CEO?
But it's true, right? Like people think, people kind of gravitate towards people who can like really, I don't know, bring people in, if that makes sense. Um,
Do you know
and
about React's version of that face or Meta?
No, tell me.
So there's I feel like such a nerd when I bring this up, and I totally am a nerd. But so they have, I forgot who made it, but there's a documentary they did on React, and I knew a little bit of it, but when I watched it was interesting, which was I know for sure they had one internal framework they had already built to do UIs, and there might even been a second one, but a lot of times, right, like really smart people, probably way smarter, not probably, they're very much smarter than myself. I'm happy to admit because they are really good. As they want to bring something better to solve the problem better. And React, the team that started with React, they went and did that. They were like, I think it was they were said like we had this weekend where we were thinking about this problem and these UIs that we're trying to make, interactive and fast and adaptable, et cetera, or scalable especially. And when they first brought in React, from what they talked about was it was a battle. Is you want to change this framework we spent all this time developing to move the entire Facebook engineering organization forward, and they had to fight for it. But when they started to, and actually I think what they specifically say is I think there was a director or like a senior director of engineering that once they got that person like sold and invested, all of a sudden they were starting to be able to get way more influence to bring it in and start making it happen. And once the data was there, or the evidence that it was good, it started taking a huge foothold at Meta. And I'm sure they maybe have more, but very, very similar story. And it took some very smart, dedicated engineers that knew how to either use their influence or bring in people that had influence to get it going. And clearly, React has taken over the world in a lot of ways.
Before we get back to our conversation, we wanted to say thank you to This.Labs, who is the sponsor of today's show. If you need help with a project that has failed to deliver on time, or are in need of a team that feels true ownership over your engineering projects, definitely hit up This.Labs. They specialize in helping business leaders ensure their strategic digital initiatives stay on track. Trusted by companies like PlayStation, Capital One, Herman Miller, PayPal, and T-Mobile, you can find them at this.co. That's THISDOT.co. Now, let's return to our show.
Yes, that's an amazing story. I haven't watched the documentary, but now that's making me want to, because who watches technology documentaries? I don't know, but the Vue one's amazing. Yes, the TypeScript one. I was part of the Angular one that's coming out, so very familiar. But I haven't watched the React one, so I definitely have to check that out. What about junior level engineers? So that doesn't really change either then, right? Like is it more of a teaching and kind of like I'm here by your side relationship, or do you feel like it indexes more on teaching? Like, is it more technical versus soft skills?
Definitely going to be more technical heavy. Of course, if you're, here's how I kind of I think about mentoring and growth around like a layered effect where you may weight something to a certain thing. So like, let's say, more junior engineer is weighted towards technical because they're still building their problem solving skills, vision, how they put things together, not just just focused on the one line that they're writing at that time. So for sure would weight towards technical. But if we're saying, around as you get farther along, if you were say like even at a place for a year, and let's is if you start building those relationships, one, that means you could start to influence and drive things, and those are opportunities because then that turns into growing to a higher level where you may get promoted and get a bunch more money, right? But also too then is that as you get to that point, not even just when you're trying to take advantage to make those things happen or to have those opportunities, is that becomes explicitly part of your job responsibilities, right? But it's now, oh, I spent a year, 2 years at this place growing, and I have all these great relationships across departments and groups and et cetera, right? You can then especially start to pounce on those. So you're always looking for investment over the long term, layering the way that you teach people and help grow them. But yeah, like you said, I think I would weigh probably more towards technical. If it turns out they're a crazy good rock star, maybe not then. Maybe it is the other skills. Or hey, maybe I need to put like a staff in front of them where it's like they're good enough where they need to have a layer that you wouldn't typically, provide to say someone newer, but they have those skills. So how do we help them if they're already rock stars?
And how do you go about setting up a good kind of mentor culture within your organization? Like, does it have to be formal? How does it work? What would you recommend to others?
So I think like a lot of things. So like I'll use first again adjacent example. I value a lot around of course honesty, but also transparency. And not every team or group you work in is like that. But how do you start to get people to open themselves up in those ways? you do it yourself to create signals that, one, this is good, this is okay, this helps us, this is acceptable. Like, not, don't say anything because you don't have experience in this architecture meeting and only let the seniors talk, right? When you start to signal, you can do the same thing through, say, like mentoring is one, very directly talking about is like, hey, here's what my role is and what mentoring looks like, and making it a formal thing. Now, formal's context and nuance though is what level of like attack, like are we shoulder to shoulder, or is it more like a long game where it's like, hey, we're going to meet once a month type of thing. You have to take those into account because every person is dynamic and different. My really nerdy saying is when you're a developer, it's zeros and ones. It's binary, more or less, right? When you do leadership or people, it's dynamic. People change. They're always very different. You know, one day could be one thing, a week later could be an entirely different thing, right? And so those are things that I think about a lot for that one.
Yeah, that sounds stressful. I mean, I deal with people too, but I'm like, are you different every day? That sounds, woo.
Oh, you made me think too. I didn't start this program, but I do like, oh, sorry, informal relationships I've seen formed because there's more formal in place. So sometimes where
Mhm.
people gravitate organically when they see that, or, you know, again, I try to be explicit with when it's people that report to me, is like mentoring is part of the responsibilities. But I've also seen, I really like these. Again, I've never done one myself. I've only ever done, oh man, I'm totally forgetting, employee resource group, ERGs. I've
ERG.
only started ERGs, but what I've always wanted to do, like others have, is start a mentoring program that's for the company, right? Is how do we break across the lines of our team to go to other groups or even other technical skills? Like, I got a lot of value when I got mentored by a DevOps person and how to build like AWS infrastructure. And it made a huge impact, not just like, hey, I could do DevOps stuff, but I can connect dots now that I couldn't before. So I like to be able to go, again, I keep saying this, wider, deeper, jump over gates and hoops and everything to create more better, different relationships that can have their own, you know, payout to help people. And I've seen some people go far by going through a wider like company initiative, which is really cool to see. And if you haven't mentored before and you like people, it is like the most fulfilling, satisfying thing, like especially in leadership. Like, I love seeing people succeed and get better and get like, oh my God, this is amazing. I feel great. I'm doing great. Like, it's so nice
Yeah.
to see people do that.
I think it's so important as well, just find a culture that you fit into, because I remember one of my first jobs, my first, tech jobs. I was like, I worked at a land company, you know,
Okay.
or was it a sand company? It was a sand company. And my mentor, you get assigned a mentor. And so my mentor though did not know what to do with me. She was like a senior manager for something. She's like, look, I don't know what to do with you. And I would make cookies like every other day because I wanted to, I would work till 8 p.m. at night. I would go and meet with the staff. This is like an 8,000 person company. I'd go meet with like the staff level engineers and like have them teach me like what are the different layers of networking, right? And he's like,
It's
we're
funny.
at layer 1, 2, like I have those conversations, but people will look and I make friends in corporate biz dev,
Mhm.
and people would look at me and be like, what is she doing? What, like, why is she doing this? Why is she making cookies? Why is she here? Like, she's obviously not working. I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm spending so much time trying to like invest my life into this company. But I think,
Mhm.
I look at engineers, for example, that I've had on my team, and, you have like, let's say a junior engineer who is just so excited and just wants to use all the new technologies and is just ready to go, very much like me, right? When I was in that org, but that org didn't know what to do with me.
Mhm.
Versus, you look at these types of engineers and you think, okay, if you can channel that energy, oh my gosh, the amount that person can produce for you as an organization is amazing. But some people just, whether it's a culture thing or not, I mean, some people just don't know what to do. And then those people just get wasted away or leave.
So my takeaway was that I should go to you for cookies because that sounds awesome. I'm just
I
kidding.
stopped making
But
cookies. Everybody thought I was like making political moves. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what the hell you're talking. This is my third week. I'm just making cookies for people. Can I not give people cookies? But you could tell like some PMs were, eyeing me like, what do you want? Like, oh my gosh, I don't want anything. I'm just making you cookies.
And that's the problem, right? Is that sometimes that's the perspective that people start in. And that's why I think, and like, I hope that sometimes when I say it's like, it's not to be manipulative, is like, I'm trying to figure out how to disarm people in a sense, because that's not my intention. It's about, we have goals and wins that we're looking for. And I know that I can't do it without you. And I hope you know that I'm also part of that, and that, it's a we need to do it together type of thing. And I could see how people would perceive it. And I've done it before. I'm not cookies. I'm not a good cook, unfortunately. I wish I was. And is, you have to try and figure out, like, how do you break that perception? And like I said, I think it's just being super upfront and transparent when you talk to people. Is like, I go into a one-on-one. So this was one of the things that stood out when I would start. One, I set my avatar in Slack to my Pikachu, so people know me when I pop up in all the channels. That's a great one to start. Get your face out there. Except I'm not a Pikachu, obviously. But anyways, is I set up one-on-ones with, of course, my team first and my boss. But as soon as I break out of that first week, I go and connect with product owners, managers, directors, and I'm just come in and I say, and this is true, is, hey, I heard, I just want to get to know you. Like, I saw what you're doing. I've seen some of your work, et cetera, but I just want to get to know you a bit. And I don't really talk about myself in those one-on-ones. And I don't want to. Is I genuinely am interested in people, their story, who they are, what makes them tick. And as soon as you figure that out, all of a sudden it's like, I can see how the gears can connect and turn, and the levers to pull, when things need to be worked on or pushed, or if you run into, some tougher situations and battles you got to go through.
Like, you can tell, like, who's wary, who's excited, who you connect with, who's going to make you cookies, who's not, who's holding all their power. Yeah.
And then what's interesting, last thing on this is, when you run into someone, let's say, that is harder to connect with, or maybe they can't drop that perception, is how you figure out a way to make that work. Because just because someone's, say, not receptive, you can't not do the things you need to do, right? So it's almost kind of like, we're talking about, again, just like junior seniors for mentoring, is like, it to me is a bigger challenge to mentor that someone that's higher up. And to me, that's the same thing, is someone that's harder to work with, or different style of working, that's harder to solve as a challenge. And you have to figure out, how do you go about doing that, right? And it sounds like, you've gone through this and it's tough, right? I'm sure you felt that at many a time, but would you say, have you also gotten better at it in a sense of how you build those relationships, as well as your cookies probably have gotten better too?
No, I decided to leave that organization. 3 weeks in, I was like, this isn't the right place for me. What am I doing? Bye.
I love that. I love that, because you're right. You said, what was it earlier, culture match, and like, if it doesn't align to you, your values, your benefit, what's important to you, then you're not going to be as happy there. And I've changed my tune, and I'm happy to tell people now, if you want to go for the money, you can. But also at the same time, is like, if you have all this unhappiness and you get paid tons and tons of money, you may not really be able to shut that side off. So I'm clapping for you, because it is hard to just see that and be like, you know what, it's okay for me to leave. Here's why and how I feel about it.
Yeah. It's interesting, because it really grinds at you. I think culture, if your team cares about something that you don't, but then you need to start caring about it because you feel like this pressure, and because everybody else cares about it, and that makes you really unhappy, then like, you should probably find a different place. My example is, at that same company, people would look at me because I would come in at, 10 minutes late or something. And I felt like I was being judged. And I was like,
who cares?
Are we adults? Are we? Hello? So that wasn't the right place for me. But
well, what I think is interesting, it's a great line when those kind of things show up, is like, so sometimes, like you said, like 10 minutes late. Like, I've said this to people directly, is like, hey, listen, like, sometimes people are late, and I always go like, is this really the thing that's going to stop us from being successful? Because I maybe come in a few minutes later than someone. And as soon as you say that, it's like, oh no. Or like, I always, if you see a problem come up, this is a great line, extreme contrast, which is, if something problem comes up, it's like, well, guess we should shut the company down. And all of a sudden the problem doesn't seem so bad.
Right. That is very true. It's all perspective. Perspective is everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I know you do a lot and you have so many amazing thoughts on engineering leadership and things like that. So where do we connect with you? Where do we find you?
So I would say I've really been pushing hard on Twitter in the sense of it's like honestly the only place I can find for like the nerds, the tech community and devs, as much of a cesspool as Twitter can be. So it's just at Dan DiGangi. Would love to connect. Absolutely feel free to tweet me. If I said something you utterly disagree with, I would love to have a healthy debate. So Twitter's the best one. I've got a LinkedIn too. You know, if anyone wants to connect there, I'm absolutely happy to.
Yeah. And I'm actually curious what, terrible things Dan said and what you disagree with, because I want to be part of that conversation. So let me know too. You can find me on Twitter at Lady Leet or on LinkedIn at Tracy S. Lee. And I wanted to give a quick shout out as well to our sponsors, This Dot, which is my company. And, we love helping companies with just being successful generally. So we get to work with really cool companies like Stripe, Wikimedia, DocuSign, Twilio, and we really enjoy being like bridging the gap between like business and engineering and helping solve real problems. So you can check us out at thisdot.co, or you can find me there as well. And thanks, Dan, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This Dot is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at thisdot.co. One more time, that's thisdot.co.